welcome to this edition of Wake Up and Live with the Arts with James McGilbray, our producer and co-host for this segment of Wake Up and Live with the Arts, where we're going to meet Terry Smith. It's my pleasure. I have not met him before, but he is quite a prolific actor, musician, arts person himself. He's from Olmsted, North Olmsted, is that right?
Right.
Well, welcome, Terry. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Sue. James.
And James, it turns
you.
out you two know each other, sort of.
Well, yeah, a little bit. We've had some similar things that have happened jointly in our past. We've done some things with people that we both know. And we have some commonalities that we're going to go over that you probably don't know, but it's a lot of fun.
Okay.
So, yeah, in fact, when you look at Terry's resume, there's so many different things. I think what stands out for me is kind of the diversity of what he does. So it's not just work as an actor, it's things like recreating history and characters. One of the things that we spoke about earlier was, after Martin Luther King's assassination, that you actually did, and this isn't, you're not trying to mimic people, but tell us about what happened with the RFK speech that you did. That's just fascinating.
Okay, I guess to back up a little bit with the speeches, I'd done some acting, and so I thought, well, what can I do when I'm not acting if I'm not in a play? So I said, well, what's a good thing to know? And the first thing that came to mind was Gettysburg Address. So I looked it up, and it's just 10 lines. It's 2.5 minutes, but it takes you into the history of it. So so I did that. So I just built on that, and looked up famous speeches, great speeches, including just different things, the Declaration of Independence, another speech at Gettysburg itself, before the battle, George Washington's farewell address, Patrick Henry's, Liberty or Death, Martin Luther King, the Dream speech, and George Patton, the
general, yes,
speech to the Third Army before going into D-Day. Yeah. So and then the RFK I guess I was looking for something for St. Patrick's Day, like when something's coming up in the calendar, I look like, well, what's a famous speech about St. Patrick's Day? And so he had given one, Robert F. Kennedy, after JFK had been assassinated. It was actually his first major speech that he gave after JFK was killed, like 6 months prior. But he chose St. Patrick's Day in Scranton to come out and give that speech. So I kind of was interested in that, and then I looked at other speeches he did, and there's one on online YouTube, RFK speech that after Martin Luther King was assassinated, April 4th, just a couple weeks ago. He was in Indianapolis, scheduled to give a regular stump speech because he was running for the presidential nomination. And so he was scheduled to appear in Indianapolis. And he was told of MLK's being shot, and a lot of the people there was a predominantly black neighborhood where he was scheduled to speak in a park there. And they had kind of heard that he was shot. They weren't sure if it was true or not, so they told RFK that the police said they couldn't guarantee his safety, but he wanted to go out there anyhow and speak just for a few minutes to the people. And so he gave that speech, and it's really, the thing about it is that it's, speeches like that are great because they apply to today as well as then. So this was about division between blacks and whites. Which direction do we want to move in as a nation? He says, and so you think of that today, and it just applies every bit as much today as it did then. So I was looking for a place to give that speech, and turns out last year at the Cleveland Urban Film Festival.
Right.
Oh yes,
in Shaker.
Right. Speaking of Peter Lawson Jones, I'm on his newsletter, so he had mentioned there that festival, and they had a monologue contest, and so I went there to participate in the monologue contest, and I chose that RFK speech to do, and I didn't win the contest, but Prester Pickett at Cleveland State University, it's the MIMS, African American.
Oh, the center that Howard Mims, the African American Center.
Cleveland State, he's associated with that. So we kept in touch, and then turns out he asked me if I would want to do this one at the Greater Abyssinia Baptist Church because it was the 50th anniversary, as you know, of Martin Luther King's assassination.
Right.
So they had a number of dignitaries there, Mayor Jackson and things. So it was a challenge for me, not that, to drop names, but it's when you're in front of people like that, it's a challenge to not screw up, So,
Yes,
and it went really good. They had a nice sound system, and an audience like that is receptive. You're there because they want to hear that.
That's right.
In relation, there was a Martin Luther King. Prester did a monologue by him beforehand, and then it just moved real natural into RFK being there. So.
Well, and one of the things that's key about that speech was it managed to bring people together, because Robert Kennedy mentioned, of course, one of the things that he said to that crowd, I've experienced this in my life. So there was an empathizing
Connection.
and a connection with the community. And when you're able to do those kinds of things, even in the acting community and in a production, that speaks to the audience in a very similar way. So,
Now,
I noticed he brought up in Martin Luther King's speech, and Robert F. Kennedy said, you can be filled with bitterness, you can be filled with hatred. And those are words that Martin Luther King used. So it's really recognizing, Martin Luther King in his speech and
yes.
and the connection there. So
now you have portrayed many historical characters, and you've been around in acting. Can you recall what you would say would be one of your favorite characters that you've ever done?
I do like the Shakespeare. I haven't done a lot of Shakespeare, but doing Lord Capulet, and I did another production of it, Friar Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Lord Capulet.
Is one of your favorites.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things going on there. I mean, just getting it kind of forced me to get into the language and appreciate Shakespeare more than, when you're in high school, you read that, it's like, why don't they just say what they want to say? So, but then reading about Shakespeare and, the iambic pentameter, and read a couple books, or at least one by Cicely Berry, who's kind of a Shakespeare, expert, and she talks about, well, Shakespeare is really the kind of way we talk anyhow, and iambic pentameter is like that, and so when you look at that, and then the accent, unaccented, and then it kind of falls into even music.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're all these things are connected together, and I think Shakespeare can lead into music and just writing, being aware of words, picking this word over another, so.
Well, it's interesting too, if I may say that, being a different art form, music, dance, and one of the things that as a part of your particular talent set is dance and some sports and things like that. And I want to go specifically into that a little bit, but to what extent do those kind of real life skills come into play when maybe you're engaged in a role? So you've studied movement, and then how you do a role that isn't involved in dance but requires specific movement, and you have that training. Do you bring that to the stage at different points in time, or have you had the opportunity or even gotten roles because of the ability to do that?
I think the dancing part, when I would read things like Roy Burko, the critic in town, and different things, he would always have ballet or dance criticism. I said, why is he reviewing dance? I didn't get the connection. But another director at a production in North Olmsted was a musical, kind of a homemade musical, Eubank, and they had music and words in it, and the director there, the choreographer kind of said it like this, that's one of his professors told him, it's like, when words aren't enough to express what you want to express, you sing.
Yes.
And when singing isn't enough, you probably heard this. When singing isn't enough, then dance, really gets everything in there.
To tell the story.
So I thought that was a good way to look at things. And then, so I had a great appreciation for dance for that reason. And so.
Now you are a dancer among your many talents.
Well, I just,
or movement
No,
as an
well,
actor? Yeah.
Well, I danced in high school and college, the disco stuff. I'm just for fun,
You
But-
and John Travolta.
But even that is fun, right? I mean, you
Uh-huh.
gotta have fun doing these things. And
You sure
but
do.
I saw people swing dancing once at some bar.
That's my parents' generation.
And
Yes.
and these are young kids, younger than me.
Yeah.
And they're doing all this stuff, and and then switching partners, and it's just, and there's skill involved, I mean.
Of course.
So you can really appreciate that. And so I took a swing dance class, Valerie
Now, did you throw
Salstrom.
your partner between your legs, up around your back, and
Of course, you want to do something?
and end up back in the hospital? Like, okay.
Well, we were in a similar film too. You were in The Avengers. And I had the opportunity to spend 3 days on that set. It's just kind of an amazing thing. And when people get a chance to spend time on those sets, you really begin to appreciate the art and some of the technology and why these movies can cost so much. But on a smaller scale, the other thing that you've done that we've shared is the 48-hour film festival. And just to give background, one of the things about the 48-hour film festival, this is one of those things, it's a process that requires on-your-feet thinking, very quick production. You essentially, have to start and stop within a time. I'll let you go ahead and explain how that process works, and tell us, did you enjoy that process?
Just backing up to your Avengers, it's funny, I mean, like you said, you get on a big set like that, and you can really appreciate, I of course didn't have any lines. I'm on public square with 500 other people. I am in the movie. If you freeze it.
You were not on the editorial, the cutting room floor. Yeah.
No, right. So, but you tell people you were in that, like these young kids, and they're more impressed with that, just being in it, than Shakespeare or something.
Of
Yeah.
course.
But, so what was
The 48-hour film
48
festival,
hour.
and how grueling, and how people have to really be on point to make that work.
Yeah, it's at first I said, what's the value of doing something like this where you're restricted in time? 48 hours. It's like, what
Guerrilla shooting.
why would
kind
an
of.
artist want
Yeah.
to do that? But when you go through it, it's like, well, it's a good exercise, and a lot of the stuff is good too. But so it's a good exercise, and because I guess when you're really doing a movie, you do have a budget, a limit.
That's right.
You do have to do it limited, so you might as well do it on a small scale. And so to get the writing, you have to start Friday night and do the writing, and then get the actors usually for Saturday, and then all the technology of rendering it, on Sunday and getting that done. So.
And there also has to be original music added to it, and all of those production values from the time and the thing is, you don't know what you're going to do initially. They actually pull it out of a hat what your subject matter is going to be, whether it's science fiction, drama, buddy film, that sort of thing. And they give you a couple of lines that have to appear in the production, a couple of prop pieces that have to appear in the production. From the time they give that to you, you have 48 hours to write it, act it, film it, edit it, and return it. And if you are at all late, you are disqualified. And I've done it 3 different times. It's such a grueling process that you have to give yourself a year or 2 after you've done it to be able to really get back into the mood of that. So we've both shared that, and it's quite an experience.
Yeah, it's a good practice. It's a different type of acting than stage acting, so it's interesting to see the differences. I think, as you probably can attest, filming is the director's art. I mean, you need to be able to act, but the director is going to pick what part of you he wants to see, which angle, and where you're on stage, you use your whole body. So it's kind of more of an actor's.
Well, speaking of being on stage and acting, you brought a small piece for us to see you in action. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a little thing I haven't really done before. Well, a lot of these speeches I do, I'll try them out at the North Olmsted Kiwanis.
Okay.
I get a free dinner out of the deal. My wife and I will go there for dinner.
Uh-huh.
And so they've been good enough to let me do that, and they like them too. So I'll do 2 or 3 of these speeches. And one was, I was doing some research on John D. Rockefeller, Clevelander, and the Standard Oil Company, and I was in the Western Reserve Library, Historical
Western
Library.
Reserve Historical Society.
Yes.
Yeah, Western Reserve.
Yeah.
And which was interesting in itself because they've got these archives, and there's some of the things that they don't want you putting your fingers on them, so they give you white gloves to go through. So I found this article by was in the Plain Dealer of 1919, and because they were doing an 80th anniversary of Rockefeller's birthday. He was turning 80, and his personal physician, Dr. Hamilton Fisk Bigger, was also, they happened to be born the same year in 1839, so they're both turning 80, but they came to Dr. Bigger, who was also Rockefeller's personal physician, and just for a backstory for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, it was Clarice F. White was the reporter, so she interviewed Dr. Fisk, or Dr. Bigger, B-I-G-G-A-R, and
They were big in Stofers too. Yes, that family name.
Both Bigger was? Oh,
Uh-huh.
okay. So they asked him how he came to locate in Cleveland, and this was his answer. And I couldn't copy the article in the library, so I just wrote it down in a notebook and then just memorized it. It's just a minute long. But I thought it was interesting because of the way it talks about Cleveland, the way people cut down Cleveland today, but back in those days, and it still can be that way even today if we look at it that way. So he answered like this. Of course, he's 80 years old too, but he says, "Well, as a boy, I worked in a shop in Canada and was asked one day to hand a newspaper to the head milliner. The paper was a Cleveland Plain Dealer of 1853, and in it was a story of Cleveland, describing it as the beautiful forest city situated on the banks of Lake Erie. A picture of Euclid Avenue and the bluffs above the city accompanied the description, and then I had a vision. I saw myself as a citizen of that beautiful city by the lake. I saw the struggles that were to be my lot, but I also saw my ultimate success. And this vision never left me in the years of my approaching manhood and through my college preparation. And so, with a bachelor's degree, I came to Cleveland. My first work here was to clean the horses of my preceptor in exchange for my board and the privilege to be present at operations and clinics. One of the doctors asked me one day if I could read and write. Having answered in the affirmative, my work as a stable boy was at an end, and I began to work in his office as a bookkeeper. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I realized my vision had come true in every detail."
Oh,
Nice.
bravo. Very nicely done.
Very nice.
Yes, yes. And I'm not going to get into it now, but every family has a story. He's a relative of ours. We found, my grandfather drove for him.
For Rockefeller?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, my whole family moved with the Rockefellers from White Plains at New York at one point. So I mean, we have it's a disjointed story, but we know what went on back in those days.
Well, he was something because he, as you probably know, he was responsible for the Spelman College in Georgia, the black women's college.
Right,
And he
right.
supported that back in the 1800s. I mean, Spelman was his wife's maiden name,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of things he didn't want to put his name on, but he's a supporter of that and abolition.
And then, of course, the University of Chicago, Illinois, later on, after some issues with Cleveland in terms of taxation and some other things, and the tragedy of his wife's passing and so forth. But, what I really appreciate about what you've just done there, we spoke earlier about doing things like the 48-hour film festival and doing these historical speeches and recreations. We talked about dance. And I think what this shows, Terry, is your versatility, that you're not just limited to, well, I can do my lines in a play. It's you are interested in doing whatever might move an audience in a given format. And it sounds like there's a real love there of the performing arts.
Oh yes, and the fact that you are diverse. means you are much more, I'm making this word of hireable, because they are looking for not one-note actors, but
That's right.
folks with dimension who can do a variety of artistic activities.
It's probably good to, like, I try different things that become interesting to me, so I think people, if they try something, they eventually find what they like, what they might be
Yes.
good at. You know, if you're a hockey player, if you're not good at it, you might like playing, but if you're not good at it, then, so, you know, if it's music or singing or acting or writing, you know, it's good to, like, I tried stand-up comedy a couple times, and
Okay.
just by writing down things that happen to you funny during the day, but it's a good exercise to try to, and then,
Does it translate into standing
Just-
up?
yeah.
Yeah.
you know, just to write it, be able to write it down
Uh-huh.
properly and without using too many words like I'm using now.
Well, see, I tried stand-up comedy. I found out I was better at sit-down comedy. So do you have anything coming up, if I may ask, in terms of works that are underway, productions that you're looking at or aspiring to be a part of? What's in your immediate future?
Well, what I've been doing the last number of years with the speeches is working on those and finding a place to do them, like at parades and, you know, Broadview Heights. I gave a Oliver Wendell Holmes speech and the RFK, and I go to a dinner like a couple times a year. The American Nationalities Movement. It was started by Ralph Perk,
Mhm.
you know,
Oh,
The
okay.
mayor.
original. And then it went through a couple of presidencies. Now Ralph Perk Jr. is the president of that, and I did a Winston Churchill speech there around Christmas time, because Winston Churchill was in the United States on Christmas Eve right after the war in 1941. Gave a little speech, so I gave that there, and they had me back and did a Reagan, you know, chair on the wall speech. So
Okay.
I look for things like that to do, and but anyhow, I'm stringing all these speeches together and to like a one-man show is what I want to do.
Uh-huh.
And then-
Well, you have the beginnings of it, so I would continue along those lines of thought and preparation, yes.
So I write, you know, the transitions or a little introduction to each speech, and then what I do is play a little piano. Like after Washington's farewell, I play Schumann's Traumerei, which to me sounds like Washington sitting down and playing, you know.
Yeah.
And then at Gettysburg, I play a real fast version of the Moonlight Sonata, where the bass sounds like cannons, you know. So it's I transition those and see if there's any interest.
Oh, that
Anybody.
sounds like fun.
Either maybe just doing it in schools or, you know, at libraries where people.
What you're describing, don't ask me why this came to mind. Cruise ships. Have you given any thought, because that's the kind of entertainment that is great on cruise ships as well.
Can you give me a name?
Off camera, I can't give you a name, but I can tell you how to get in touch with, well, you get
Well,
in
I
touch
did-
with the cruise lines, that's what you do.
I did think about that. I maybe in a couple years, if you know, I'm able to retire then from computer programming, might be able to do something like that.
Well, in the meantime, if folks want to contact you about appearing as either a special historical character or perhaps audition you for a play, how would they get in touch with you? What's your preference?
Well, I have a website which lists all the speeches. It's like 2 hours worth of speeches throughout, you know, chronological order. So that website is actingbuff.com. You know, theater buff was taken, so I got acting buff.
Yes.
Nice.
And so,
And we'll make sure to put that on the screen so that our viewers will have plenty of time to write it down and go to the site and look at it.
Okay.
And do you have an email address that people could contact you that you'd like to give out?
sure, tsmith@actingbuff.com.
Okay.
Okay, repeat it one more time.
tsmith, tsmith@actingbuff.com.
Okay.
And one last thing, I noticed that you have stayed pretty much in the outer burb cities, if you will. Are you thinking about, or have you done much work with the Cleveland theaters, the prominent ones, the more professional theaters? You did something with Cleveland Public, you did something with Caribou, which is where we are now, and some of the others, because your talent would seem to lend itself to branching out to more of the Cleveland audience.
Yeah, I did audition down there to Cleveland Playhouse. once or twice. I don't know if I attribute it to that they want someone that can be there during the day.
Yes,
But I'm working
because-
during the day, so I can't really do that. And Gene mentioned Oberlin Theater too. It's another thing. I think they need someone, a dedicated, committed, actor to spend time for those things. But I may be wrong about that. It was just the audition.
Okay, well, at the Cleveland Playhouse, a couple of things. Yes, they are sort of looking for local talent, but second, they're primarily working with AEA, American Actors Equity Association actors who are free during the day, but keep going.
And I've tried movies too, like auditioning for speaking roles in movies, and
Uh-huh.
Lillian Piles, who you've had
Oh,
on.
Lillian
wonderful,
Piles
yeah.
casting, yes.
She was really nice because she wanted me to get something, her and Will that she works with.
Will,
So
I can't think of his last name.
Moore.
Yes.
So she doesn't just put you in front of the camera, take your audition and go. She gave me a couple ideas to do something differently, and took time to
She's
put
a
my
great
best self
casting
forward.
director.
And
so.
she's in the process now of casting a major film. I got a call from them last week. She's casting a major film now. And I know even, in terms of, background, some of those kinds of things. But, you may want to contact her agency soon about that, because that's coming up very soon. So
Yeah, I think you're right though. I mean, if you want to, there are ways to get more into it and commit some time to really pushing forward and doing more. So.
well, that retirement thing will work out well for you once you get finished with that
Well,
program.
that's one thing they say you should start doing now before you retire. Start doing now so that when you do retire, you can.
Are you close to retirement?
Yeah, I could go. I could go in a couple of years.
Well, that's excellent. Keep at it. And on that note, as I said in our earlier segment, we are going to wrap this segment with James McGilbray and with our star, our featured actor, Terry Smith, who I want to thank for coming by. My pleasure to meet you, and hope we see each other again and maybe work together in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're
Having me.
more than welcome. And so James and I have a special guest coming up. Want you to stay tuned. We'll be right back.